Hello, dear viewers. Today, we are heading on a trip to Mount Lovchen, located in Montenegro. During this trip, we will discuss one of the most terrifying duos who operated in Australia, individuals capable of concealing information about dozens of victims whose cases remain unsolved in the archives. Please support my channel by liking and subscribing. It really helps with the channel's growth. Shian Kingi was born in New Zealand on December 16, 1974. Later, her family moved to Australia. She lived with her family in the small town of Noosa Heads, Australia, with a population of about 5,000 people. This town is located on the coast, in a warm, paradise-like place. From a young age, she was sweet and kind, loved sports and dancing. She especially enjoyed ballet and netball. By nature, she was modest, but had a charm that captivated everyone she met, making her very popular among her peers. She was beautiful, tall, with long blonde hair and extraordinary eyes. The schoolgirl definitely stood out in a crowd because of her appearance. Unfortunately, this played a fatal role in her life. Friday, November 27, 1987, was an ordinary weekday. The heroine of the story had just finished her classes. It was a beautiful sunny day. Usually the weather here is perfect at this time, with hot sun and a cool breeze, so locals relax on the beach. Shian's mother, named Linda Kingi, went to the store. She intended to buy groceries and fabric to sew a beautiful outfit for her daughter's upcoming birthday. The parents were planning a party for this occasion and were actively preparing for it. After school, Shian got on her yellow bicycle. She knew she needed to help her mother choose the fabric. The woman wanted to buy exactly what her daughter would like. So the schoolgirl went to the store right after classes. Mother and daughter chose fabric for the dress. They finished in the late afternoon, right after completing their shopping. Linda also planned to visit the bakery to buy pastries for dinner, but Shian was already very tired and wanted to go home. Choosing fabric seemed very tiring to her. The child asked to be allowed to go home so she could meet her mother later. Linda agreed, so the schoolgirl set off on her favorite shortcut by bicycle. It was a route she had traveled hundreds of times. But today, it turned out to be not as safe as usual. In the 1980s, Noosa Heads was a quiet provincial town. Here, people knew each other well and were friendly, making the town one of the safest in the area. The Kingi family home was only a few kilometers from the store. It was just a few minutes' bike ride away. Linda was confident in the safety of her 12-year-old daughter. After all, nothing bad had ever happened in their quiet town. In fact, the mother planned to follow her immediately after buying a few groceries, which should not have taken much time. At 4:45 p.m., Shian got on her bicycle and left. The path led the schoolgirl through the park towards home. Linda went in the opposite direction. After buying the pastries, she headed home by car, taking a different route. Considering that Shian was not riding too fast, the difference between them was just a few minutes. Presumably, the woman should have arrived home just a few minutes after her daughter arrived by bicycle. When Linda returned, she expected to see the yellow bicycle near the house, as well as Shian herself. But the schoolgirl was not home. Initially, this did not cause concern, as the girl might have met a friend on the way or visited someone. The weekend was approaching after a long school week, so teenagers often met after school to spend time together. Shian had many friends, so she regularly visited them. Moreover, they had just chosen a beautiful fabric with her mother. The schoolgirl might have stopped by a friend's house to show off. It was also planned to have a meeting with friends over the weekend, so the heroine of the story might have stopped by to discuss upcoming events with some of the future guests. However, soon Linda began to worry. The girl was still not home. Shian was well-mannered and never allowed herself to stay away from home for long without permission. As a precaution, Linda decided to call a few friends whose children Shian communicated with. She wanted to make sure the girl was with them. But to the mother's horror, no one had seen Shian. By 8 p.m., the schoolgirl still had not appeared at home, despite living in a small, quiet town with minimal crime. Shian always adhered to curfew and never stayed out after dark. Naturally, on a Friday evening, people began to relax and go out after the work week. Therefore, even the safest town could become quite risky in the dark. Linda, as an adult, understood this. Eventually, she decided to walk the path her daughter regularly took on her bicycle. The mother knew this route well. It was the shortest way from their home on the outskirts to the town's shops. Along with her husband, they walked this path and, about halfway, found Shian's yellow bicycle lying abandoned on the ground. The girl was nowhere to be seen, and there were no traces, but the abandoned bicycle looked highly suspicious. For Shian, it was her first personal means of transportation, and she valued it greatly. She had asked for it for a long time, and the bicycle was of great importance to her. She would never have left it unattended. Unfortunately, they could not find the girl nearby. The parents called for her, but there was no response. Naturally, after this, Linda and her husband decided to go to the police station. The couple stopped at home to get a photo of their daughter and make sure she had not returned. With the photo, the parents went to the police. The officers took the parents' report about their missing daughter and immediately declared the child missing. Everyone knew that the town had a close-knit local community and an almost non-existent crime rate, so it was expected that the girl would be found quickly, and it was just a simple misunderstanding. Perhaps the teenager was spending time with friends or got lost in the woods during a walk. Nevertheless, the parents' words and the circumstances caused great suspicion, which the police hesitated to discuss to avoid upsetting the parents prematurely. One of the officers remembered that shortly before this incident, there had already been one abduction in their area. The police decided to reach out to local media. In the absence of social networks and the internet, they had to use traditional methods. In the morning newspapers, all the town's residents saw the announcement of Shian's disappearance. It was hoped this would help find at least one witness who had seen the 12-year-old schoolgirl the previous evening. Indeed, several people came forward to provide information to the police. However, they all claimed they had not seen anything suspicious. It turned out these were witnesses who had noticed Linda and Shian while they were choosing fabric for the dress. But no one had seen the girl on her way home, and no one had been on the path at that time. Witnesses provided various details. People tried to highlight any suspicious facts, such as strange cars or other town residents behaving unusually. But no one saw anyone following Linda and Shian. One of the witnesses mentioned a dirty white 1973 Holden Kingswood station wagon seen that evening. The person who contacted the police reported that there was a dark-haired man and a full-figured woman in the car. They were aimlessly driving around the street, seemingly looking for someone. It was possible that Shian might have approached them. Witnesses saw the suspicious couple shortly before her disappearance. The police involved in the case analyzed the cars in the database. There were about 170,000 station wagons in the area, roughly 10,000 of which were white. Thus, the search area significantly expanded. They had to check all the cars in the region and follow other leads provided by callers. This required significant resources. Dozens of police officers and hundreds of volunteers were involved in the search operation. Many relatives, friends, and neighbors of the family, as well as other concerned people, volunteered to help in the search for the girl. Both ground and aerial search methods were used. Photographs of the place where the teenager disappeared were taken and published in the media. This common method helps trigger witnesses' memories related to the events of that day. Unfortunately, no one was able to provide any valuable information to law enforcement. However, by Sunday, several new witnesses came forward, which indeed helped the investigation move forward. The first witness was sunbathing by the creek in the forest when an unknown man attacked her. He assaulted her and tried to drag her into his car. Notably, he was driving the previously mentioned white Holden Kingswood station wagon. A second witness saw this moment and helped the girl fend off the attacker. The man then followed the car as the driver tried to flee but soon lost sight of it. He was able to describe the car in detail and provided the police with the number. The vehicle's license plate had the number 429. Detectives decided to check this number in the police database. This number was indeed registered in the region. They found out that the car was owned by a woman named Valmay Beck. Detectives quickly found the address and went to the house where the car owner lived. An elderly man opened the door to the investigators. He confirmed that he knew the car's owner. According to this man, he was not related to Valmay, but his stepson Barry was her husband. They had been married for a year. Barry's description matched the portrait created from the witness's account, who was attacked near the creek. The suspect's name was Barry John Watts. The police had no grounds for arrest and certainly no reason to charge him with the girl's abduction. Nevertheless, the vehicle's owner and her husband were considered suspects in the crime. Unfortunately, the man did not know where the couple was, but mentioned that they frequently changed residences, renting places, and constantly traveling, which seemed strange. 3 days had passed since Shian's disappearance when another witness came forward. The man again mentioned a white Holden Kingswood, which was seen near the creek. He also described a muscular driver and a full-figured woman acting very suspiciously. An hour after this statement, the police finally finished checking the background of Valmay Beck and Barry Watts. It turned out that shortly before the events began, they had been released from prison in Perth, Western Australia. Both had extensive criminal records. Just a few weeks before the events began, the couple had moved to Queensland from Perth, trying to avoid the police. They had missed their parole check-ins. The criminals arrived in their sedan, but almost immediately exchanged it for a white station wagon, which had already been seen in several suspicious episodes. The police realized they were dealing with dangerous criminals with a history of multiple offenses. Their criminal records included armed robberies, break-ins, document forgeries for financial gain, and fraudulent activities, which were just part of the extensive criminal histories of these seasoned offenders. This was very bad news for the Kingi family. If their daughter had encountered these individuals, the chances of finding her alive and unharmed were minimal. Barry Watts was 33 years old at the time, and his wife Valmay Beck was 43. Beck had 6 children from previous relationships. Both were considered highly dangerous criminals and were on the police's wanted list. The police now had to urgently find this couple and check their involvement in the schoolgirl's disappearance. Meanwhile, 6 days after Shian's disappearance, a man named Tim came to the police station with bad news. He reported that the previous evening he had smelled a foul odor while walking through the park on his way to work. He was late, so he did not pay much attention to it, thinking it was a dead animal. However, on his way back, his curiosity got the better of him as he smelled the unbearable stench of decomposition again in the same spot. Off the side of the road, near a stream, he discovered the body of a girl. The girl was dressed in a school uniform and had blonde hair. The police arrived at the scene immediately. There, the officers found the mutilated body of the girl. It was evident that the girl had been assaulted. Additionally, there were marks on its neck indicating strangulation with a foreign object, and the body had 12 stab wounds. The spine was also broken, and the wings were so mutilated and twisted that the attacker had nearly severed them from the body. The death was very agonizing. The police immediately suspected that the body found was the missing girl. She was wearing the same clothes and matched the description provided by her mother. In the lab, the forensic examiner confirmed that the victim was 12-year-old Shian Kingi. 5 days after this horrifying discovery, the child's family and friends gathered for her funeral. At the farewell ceremony, one of her classmates read an excerpt from Peter Pan, implying that his friend would forever remain a child. Flowers were laid along the path near where the tortured girl was found. After the information was released by the media, another woman contacted the police. This was a nurse named Nicole Clue. She reported having also encountered suspicious individuals in the area who were driving a white station wagon. One evening, after finishing her shift at the hospital and walking through the parking lot to her car, Nicole noticed a white car entering the lot and creeping towards her. Sensing something was wrong, she ran to her car, jumped in, and locked the door. The station wagon did not back off and pulled up next to the passenger door, and a man got out. He approached the window and asked for help with a map, pretending to need directions to some place. The driver appeared calm and quite friendly, so the nurse was persuaded to help and even got out of her car. She wanted to end the conversation quickly, as she saw a suspicious-looking woman in the station wagon and what seemed to be ropes in the back. Additionally, the nurse felt uneasy, sensing danger. The man behaved very calmly and politely, but with each word, he took a small step closer to the nurse. Nicole explained the directions several times, but he kept repeating the question, getting closer each time. When he was only a few steps away from the nurse, she saw another man walking past them through the parking lot. The driver of the white car also saw him, got distracted, and hesitated. Taking advantage of the situation, the witness jumped into her car. The nurse locked the door and drove away. She said this incident happened on November 2nd, before Shian's disappearance. Investigators did not consider all these stories about the white car a mere coincidence and pursued this lead. Detectives showed the new witness several photographs. Among the unfamiliar faces, she unmistakably identified Valmae Beck and Barry Watts. But the witness statements did not end there. The day after this testimony, another eyewitness came to the station and reported another attempted abduction. According to him, he saw a stranger attack a woman on the street, hold a knife to her throat, and try to drag her into his car. It was again a white station wagon. However, the victim resisted, even managing to wound the attacker's hand with his own knife. Before the girl could escape, the police contacted the lucky stranger and found fingerprints on her car that belonged to the suspect, Barry Watts. She also identified the pair of villains who were likely involved in kidnappings, rapes, and murders in the area. The police understood that highly dangerous criminals were at large, threatening the entire region. Therefore, an interception plan was announced throughout Australia. Alerts were sent out for the two criminals and the white car they were using. The information about the fugitives was made public in the media. It seemed that the criminals had gone into hiding. However, with the alert issued, the details were now available to every police department in the country. Their capture was only a matter of time. In a small town called Lowood, a local power line worker was installing wiring at a height and happened to spot a vehicle matching the description of the wanted criminal's station wagon. He recognized it from the media alert he had seen a few days earlier. When he came down, he confirmed that this vehicle was indeed being sought by the police. He immediately went to the police station and pointed out on a map where he had seen the vehicle. When the patrol officers arrived at the location, the criminals had already fled. The police were close but had missed them again. Then, information came in about a money transfer made by the suspects as they left New South Wales. The station wagon was spotted in a motel parking lot. Fortunately, when the police arrived, it was still there. The motel staff gave the officers access to the fugitives' room. The officers knew they were dealing with highly dangerous criminals who might be armed, so they kept their weapons ready. Contrary to the officers' expectations, the criminals did not resist and were arrested. In the motel room, the police found wigs, hair dye, and clippers, indicating that the couple was trying to alter their appearance to successfully evade the police. The interrogation of the suspects lasted about 12 hours. During this time, Barry Watts did not break. He said nothing to the police, and it was clear that he and his wife had an agreement to stick to the same story, not giving away any valuable information. Despite this, Valmae Beck quickly broke down. She believed that by cooperating, she could mitigate her sentence. She then told the authorities a story that sent chills down their spines. According to the criminal, on November 27th, she was wandering the streets of the town with her husband. The reason was their search for a new victim, as Barry was obsessed with assaulting females. He especially liked victims much younger than himself. His wife was 10 years older and far from his ideals, so to satisfy his unhealthy desires, Barry began sexually assaulting and murdering women. The criminal always chose those who were younger and more attractive, fitting his tastes. And Valmae simply went along with him out of fear of breaking up and divorcing. At least that was her claim. On that fateful day, Barry was determined to find a girl and be her first man. His wife, Valmae, was to help him abduct the child, and she agreed to do it. That Friday morning, they had been driving around the area for several hours. The criminals believed that catching a girl would be easy. However, most of the potential victims were in groups, making it impossible to discreetly abduct one of them. Initially, Barry himself tried to approach several potential victims, but they all managed to escape in one way or another. Finally, Barry realized that he was less trustworthy than his wife and decided to use Valmae as bait to lure the victim. They stopped near a local park and went for a walk. On the path, the criminals saw an attractive girl riding her yellow bicycle leisurely. Barry chose her as the target. Valmae waved at the girl in a friendly manner. The unsuspecting schoolgirl stopped. Valmae began fabricating a story about trying to find her lost poodle and then asked the girl for help, claiming it was hard for her to catch the dog. The girl, naturally kind-hearted, was distracted and talked with Valmae, genuinely trying to help. At that moment, Barry attacked Shian from behind. He covered her mouth with his hand and dragged her into their dirty car. There, he wrapped her in tape and tied her up. Valmy stayed in the back seat with the child while Barry got behind the wheel. They drove 12 kilometers from the abduction site and stopped in a forest. Here, Barry laid out a large blanket and began carrying out his vile plans. For several hours, he acted out his most depraved fantasies. Barry's wife recounted that during these torments, the girl never cried. She was very brave, endured everything stoically, and obediently complied, possibly in the hope that they would let her go. Valmy also believed that Shian didn't need to be killed and could simply be left there once her husband was done. However, Barry had no intention of leaving her alive from the beginning. The injuries Shian sustained were fatal, and Valmy watched the entire time. She informed the police that the belt used for strangulation, as well as the blanket and a few other items, were discarded in a nearby creek. The police went to the specified location, and everything Valmy had described was found. At the supposed site of the assault and murder, they found strands of blonde hair, which appeared to belong to Shian. Valmy's confession was 28 pages long. She detailed all the horrors that Shian endured before she died. Barry remained unbroken during questioning, but he was furious when he learned of his wife's confession. To ensure Barry was put behind bars, investigators sought his confession, but breaking him was impossible. They then resorted to a more complex method. An undercover agent was placed in the temporary detention cell with Barry. The agent was to spend all his time with Barry, posing as a regular inmate. His task was to build a friendship with Barry and eventually elicit a confession. A 27-year-old police officer was chosen for this dangerous mission. He later noted that this was one of the most challenging cases in his career. Having children of his own, it was extremely difficult for him to interact with such a monster. The officer had to play the role of a friendly inmate, maintain conversations, ultimately listen to the confession of the brutal murder of the schoolgirl, and hide his disgust. Throughout the mission, the officer struggled with the desire to strangle Barry. After completing the task, he was so emotionally exhausted that he took a 3-month health leave to recover. However, the mission failed, and they did not get a confession. The scale of Barry's cruelty shocked everyone. Forensic experts called Shian's murder the most horrific case in their practice. Despite this, Barry was determined to avoid punishment. During one of his meetings with his wife, he subtly hinted that she should take her own life before the trial to avoid testifying against him, implying she would suffer otherwise. According to state laws, in this case, the witness's testimony would not have legal force. He communicated with his wife very cautiously, choosing his words carefully so that the authorities could not use the phone conversation as evidence of his guilt. Fortunately, Valmy did not listen to her husband and preserved her life. When the couple was brought to court, about 200 people gathered at the entrance, eager to look the brutal killers in the eyes. There was a high likelihood that people would attempt to lynch the murderers. But to the surprise of law enforcement officers, as these monsters were led through the crowd, everyone applauded. The local residents were relieved and happy that the police had made the streets safer. One of the officers even teared up, moved by the crowd's reaction. In court, Valmy testified against her husband, portraying him as a true monster. She tried to justify herself by claiming she was forced into this heinous act, but there were strong reasons to believe that she participated willingly. Valmy shared an interesting fact during her testimony. She had been associated with another serial killer, Catherine Burney, convicted in Perth. In prison, she had befriended Burney, who had committed murders with her boyfriend. Burney had told Valmy that sex during a murder was the most intense and pleasurable experience of her life. After hearing this, Barry became obsessed with the idea. On October 20th, 1988, the jury deliberated the verdict. It took the jurors 3 hours to find the criminals guilty. Valmy Beck received 10 years for kidnapping, 3 years for rape, and life imprisonment for murder. However, due to her cooperation with the prosecution, she retained the possibility of parole. Deliberations for Barry's sentence took 6 hours. He was found guilty of murder, kidnapping, and rape. Barry received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, with his case placed in the archive of those not eligible for release. However, the story of this couple did not end there. In prison, Barry began bragging about his criminal achievements and confided to fellow inmates that he was involved in another similar crime. He spoke of the murder of 31-year-old teacher Helen Mary Feeney, who disappeared on October 29, 1987. It turned out that Valmay was also involved in this incident. It was established that during an attempted car robbery, Helen caught Barry. Valmay confessed that she saw her husband murder the teacher before they dumped the body in the trunk and discarded it at a landfill near Brisbane. Meanwhile, Barry remained silent. Despite the police's efforts, he provided no information about the second victim, Helen Feeney, likely hoping to challenge the conviction in Shian's case in the future. However, in 2007, he finally confessed to Shian's murder. He detailed what happened, and his account matched his wife's testimony. Valmay Beck suffered attacks from fellow inmates because of the nature of her crimes. She was regularly beaten, and on one occasion she was seriously injured when struck on the head with a tin can. To prevent her from being beaten to death, she was transferred to a safer correctional facility. There, she converted to Christianity and seemed to seek redemption. She applied for parole 3 times, but each time she was denied. In 2007, she divorced her murderer husband. Valmay had serious health issues, suffering from obesity and diabetes. In 2008, her condition worsened to the point where doctors had to place her in an induced coma following heart surgery. The police hoped she would make additional confessions on her deathbed regarding other crimes they suspected the couple of committing in the area. Unfortunately, she died without regaining consciousness at the age of 64, taking all the information about their criminal activities to her grave. While Barry still carries this burden, law enforcement officials believe he will never confess to other crimes.